Well, good afternoon and welcome to our presentation on what is gender. Beyond the binary, this is what I hope will be the first in a series of lectures that we'll be presenting here to educate folks on various issues related to the LGBT community and our lives. Just as a caution, this presentation will include some medical terms and discussion of human sexuality. The information in this presentation comes from the Our Whole Lives program, the module for our middle school students, and 3 of the workshops in there in particular that pertain to gender. There's also information taken from the Unitarian Universalist Association's LGBTQ website, and some additional sources that I've got in the supplementary credits. The handouts that you have include the definitions from the UUA website, a diagram that we'll be using later on in the program, and some references for you, including some things you can get to on the internet at home. Now, your speaker here is Michelle Paquette, me. Yay. I am a transgender person, have been all my life. I came out about 18 months ago and have been living as my authentic self here in Walnut Creek. I work with a number of organizations, including Susan's Place, which is the largest online support group for transgender persons in the world. I also work with other groups like the Diablo Valley Girls and several other regional groups. I was drawn to come here to MDUC as a safe place for all of us, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer persons, and by a faith here that encouraged questioning and discovery. I found it to be a very positive message that was being given here. And that's why I'm here, why I'm participating, and why I hope to assist with the number of programs here. But enough about me. Let's jump into things here. I want to start off by telling everyone a couple of short stories, very short, just a few minutes. They're little vignettes. They're a composite of the life experiences of several people that I've worked with. Some elements might sound familiar to some of you, some elements might sound strange, but these stories all provide a little insight into some of us and our relationship to gender, how gender has affected us. So with that, I'd like to tell you a couple of stories. Now, I'm going to tell you a story about 2 different children growing up not so long ago. So just get comfortable and relax. Get your feet on the floor. Close your eyes if you find that comfortable, or just gaze into the distance. Take in a nice deep breath. Hold it. Let it out. Just relax. Now, picture a child. They're sitting on the floor playing with some blocks, bits of cloth, and a kitten. The kitten loves the attention and being held. The child would love to have a doll, but the kitten will do. They build with the blocks. Oh, not the great high towers that some children build, that they can send crashing down with much chaos and noise. The child builds a house with kitten-sized rooms. A pillowcase is folded neatly and set in one of the rooms to make a bed. They play and they imagine what it would be like to be grown up and take care of a child. They'd certainly be different than their parents are. They know that as they grow, as teenagers, their bodies will change. And they dream of soft curves and little oddities fading away and feeling right. They've always dreamed of this, but are afraid it won't happen that way. They've heard things at school from other children, and they know that telling others their dreams won't end well, so they're quiet. They've had a few problems at school. The PE teacher sent a note home saying they have poor gross motor skills. Whatever that means. Dad is taking the child to enroll in the PAL baseball league on Saturday morning. They'd rather stay at home and play with the kitten. Now, across town, Another child plays with a friend. They just spent the last weekend with Grandma and Grandpa, having grand adventures at their house just outside of town. There's a creek behind the house, and they caught tadpoles there in an old mason jar. Grandpa says that if you watch those tadpoles really closely, you can see them turn into frogs. And the child wonders, if they grow, if they can change like that, could their small body somehow really grow into a great tall body with those huge hands, strong arms, and that great gray beard like Grandpa? Grandpa just chuckled. And Grandma said, "That's all stuff and nonsense," and then made them wash up for dinner. Still, it was a fun weekend. On Sunday, when they returned home, they saw that Melissa, who lived next door, looked very different. The child asked Melissa what had happened to their hair. "Oh, I got bubble gum in it, and I tried to get it out, but it was a mess. Mom had my hair cut. I hate it. People laugh at me and keep calling me son and boy." The child asked Melissa if they have any more gum. So these little vignettes are from the lives of some transgender persons that I know who grew up in the 1950s and 1960s. They're a composite of the life experiences of several people. They're built around the ideas of gender, including things that we're going to talk about today: gender identity, gender presentation, and gender roles. I'm going to give you some more information about those terms and what they mean in our lives, all our lives. Now, gender is something that we all think we know what it is, right? Boy or girl, pink or blue, that's gender. Turns out that's just what our culture happens to think. Different cultures treat it very differently. I'll give you a few short definitions here that we'll use to get things rolling and help us talk about these cultures, societies, and their ideas about gender. Gender roles. The gender role is everything we say and do to tell others, or even reinforce to ourselves, the degree to which we are a male or female, androgynous, or something else. Gender systems are the systems our roles play in society, how we all interact together to reinforce and interpret those roles. Gender identity, this is going to get interesting. Gender identity is one's own personal experience with gender, the persistence of one's individuality as a male, a female, or perhaps androgynous. Again, with our self-awareness of these things in mind. There are variations in all these, and we'll get into that too. Now, I mentioned our system. Our system is what we call Western culture. It's based on Western European, post-Middle Ages cultural developments. There are lots of other systems in the world, and there have been for thousands of years. I'd like to talk about a few of those systems just to give you an idea of how other cultures look at the idea of gender. The Native Americans have a concept that we interpret as two spirits people, people who embody both male and female spirits. There are even specialized words for this, for masculine, female-bodied people and feminine, male-bodied people. They're respected folks. They are typically the arbitrators, the healers, the negotiators. And down in Chile, there are the Mapuche people. They have Machi shamans, again, somewhere between male and female. And these are the people who keep all their political, cultural, and spiritual tradition for their culture. India has the Hijra and Satin, essentially celibate persons, not male or female in the culture, but feminine in behavior and appearance. Polynesia, there are several cultures there that have their own special names, again, for people who are primarily more feminine males. Thailand is kind of interesting. They adapted from the old Buddhist tale of three genders, the Katui, the persons with male birth who appear female, And there are also tom, persons who appear male yet were born assigned female. Our culture is a little different. We kind of limited ourselves. We have a thing we call the gender binary. The doctor looks at that baby when it's born, checks the shape of that little bit of tissue between the legs and says, oh, that's a boy, or that's a girl. And that determines pretty much everything. Boys are going to be masculine, dress a certain way. They have to fill certain roles like being the protectors. And the girls are supposed to be feminine, dress a different way, fulfill other roles in society like being the caregivers. This is a cultural script we've been handed. And under this script, our genitals, of all things, that little bit of tissue down there, determines who we are, how we interact with society, how society treats us, how much it costs to have a shirt dry cleaned. Honestly, I feel like this is a little silly. Does one form of that little bit down there make someone masculine, tough, active, and strong, and another little bit make them feminine, nurturing, vulnerable, and passive? I have trouble seeing that. So this gender binary concept is just a little bit limiting at best. It sets our whole destiny from birth. It's harmful at worst. I mean, do we really want to determine who a person should and should not be by just their genitals? People are complicated. Saying that determines the kind of life we lead, what kind of people we should be, how we have to interact with others, that's a very simple-minded sort of thing. These other cultures appear to know something that we don't. What happened? It turns out that, around 1300 AD in Europe, a council of folks got together and decided sex, gender, all that's sole purpose is procreation. Anything else off limits, that's the rules. If it doesn't help with procreation, it ain't allowed. And that became the gender binary model, driving everything off of this little bit of identification at birth. We've inherited that as part of our culture. The same patriarchy that's given us some nice things has also given us, unfortunately, this gender binary and some of the little supremacy issues we're dealing with, colonialism, some of those other things too. So there's a little bit of improvement that we could make on things in the future. And that's part of why we're here today. So, what is gender? How's it different from sex? Glad you asked. Gender at birth is that bit of anatomy, what we have when we're born. The doctor takes a look there and says, oh, male, oh, female, checks the appropriate box on the birth certificate. That's it. Now, a small fraction of births are actually what are called intersex people. It's a little different. About 1 in 100 births are affected. And when the doctor takes a look, there are some ambiguities. Some things might not be entirely one way or the other. They usually figure it out. So with sex, we are talking about something specific on our bodies as our society defines it, what we use to check off that box on a birth certificate. With gender, we're talking about something a little different. It's how we think about ourselves, how we identify. This biological sex is linked to our anatomy. Chromosomes are a part of it, and hormones in our body. They're all tied to this, although there are some very interesting variations that I'll get into a little later. So we talk about a person being male or female or intersex. Intersex, as I said, there can be some variations. In fact, the tricky part here is in about 1 in 1,500 births, a specialist actually has to be brought in to figure out which of those two check boxes, male or female, should be checked. Fortunately, they're very well trained, and they often get it right. There's about a 10% error rate. So sex sets this biology up. Gender is different. We want to keep it a little different if we could, because intersex people have problems with this. Other folks with other really interesting things I'll get into also have problems with this concept. So, we have gender, and that refers to these cultural and social layers that are put on top of our biology. That's all our biology, by the way, not just the biology that determines what's down there between our legs. I'll get into that too. Things are always a little more complicated than we'd like to believe. So, what is that gender stuff then? Gender is that interrelationship we have, that relationship between masculinity, femininity, both, neither. It's how we express ourselves based on that relationship, and for some, it's our relationship with our biological sex. There's gender identity. That's what gender I feel most aligned with, or sometimes that includes the gender role I feel most comfortable in. There's our gender orientation. Again, that's up here. Who we are most attracted to, romantically or sexually. There's gender expression. The way that we perform gender, our speech, clothing, hair. Oftentimes, but not always, our sex relationship is informed by this gender information. Now, I mentioned biology earlier. It's worth noting there's recent research that's found evidence of a biological component in the structure of our brain to our gender identity and orientation. This is down in the deep structure, not our thinky bits up high, but the parts that control and regulate our bodies. And we'll get into that once we've got a little more vocabulary. So I use some different terms here. Gender identity. That's who I am in terms of gender. That's an individual's sense of being male, female, both, neither. With the exception of agender people, people who feel they do not have a gender, almost everyone has a gender identity. There's a few specialized words that come along with this. You'll hear people refer sometimes in our culture to genderqueer or third gender, gender fluid, or two-spirits people. Those are terms that our culture is just now accepting as something besides male and female. New terms that are being introduced. Gender orientation is another portion of gender. That is who I am attracted to, sexually or romantically. Now, sexual orientation is something that we've been hearing about for a while. The gay and lesbian community, for example, has different orientations than most of the heterosexual population. So we hear words like asexual, not attracted to anyone. Bisexual, attracted to one's own gender and others. Gay, that was often thought just men attracted to men. More broadly, it tends to refer these days to all same-sex attraction. Lesbian, women attracted to women. Pansexual, attracted to people regardless of gender, just looking at other people as people, which I think is kind of nice. Questioning, just not sure. And what we call straight, heterosexual people attracted to the opposite gender. There's a one word, queer, that pops up quite often, and it's had a number of meanings. It was originally picked up to be an insult to the community. Oh, those queer people. So, of course, the community immediately grabbed a hold of it and says, damn right, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. Challenge the status quo. It's often used these days as an umbrella term for the entire LGBTQ, etc. community. It's also a self-identity for people that feel we don't meet the cultural norms. And it also is used for people who are attracted to others of many genders. They might have a genderqueer orientation. There's also, besides sexual orientation, affectional or romantic orientation. They can actually be different. A person may be asexual, not sexually drawn to anyone, but they can still be romantically drawn to certain types of people. So romance can be out there, even without the sex drive behind it. That's kind of neat too. The third big part that we'll look at is gender expression or presentation. Now, these are the ways in which a person manifests masculinity, femininity, both, or neither. It's how a person dresses to provide cues, how they appear trying to provide cues. For instance, I appear fairly feminine, I hope. I'm trying. Okay. You'll also run across cross-dressing. Cross-dressing means that a person is occasionally wearing clothing of the opposite gender from which they identify. So, my being up here dressed like this, I am not cross-dressing because I identify as female. Other people might. They might do it for entertainment or amusement. There's one specific area called drag. People have heard of drag, right? Yeah, sure. Drag is a performative presentation of gender. The persons doing drag are essentially giving you a theatrical performance. It's performance art. Sometimes low comedy, but it's performance art. The drag performer could be a straight man, a straight woman, a trans man, trans woman. They might be gay, they might be straight. It doesn't really matter. Now, I have to say, I've never actually seen a straight woman performing as a drag queen, but I have seen them perform as drag kings. That is a male drag character. So those exist. So lots and lots of parts there. We've talked about identity. We've talked about orientation, both sexual and romantic, and expression. Now, please realize there's more than just that male and female. There's a whole range of possibilities in between for identity and orientation and expression. They're all in ranges. A person may be somewhere in there in the middle. They may not feel they're any of that at all, just somewhere off away. There are actually some nice simple diagrams to help show you these. In your handouts, we have the gender unicorn on the third page. Yeah, I know, it's a kind of a cute diagram. There was a thing called the genderbread man for a while. Another fun one, very similar, but believe it or not, there were copyright issues. I know. Sometimes, people, sometimes. So, the gender unicorn shows us gender identity. Could be male, female, or other. The degree to which you are male or female. The degree to which you feel that you're neither of those. Gender expression, how feminine your expression is, how masculine you might be. Or perhaps you try to be something different. There's the sex assigned at birth, which, because of the way birth certificates are, is pretty darn binary looking. Oregon now actually has another box, which is kind of neat. There's our orientation. Are we more physically attracted to women, to men, or to other genders? Are we emotionally attracted to women, men, or other genders? All these exist in ranges. To give you an idea of what these look like when we fill them out, I'll show you my unicorn. So here we can see identity, female. Male, no, don't do that. Other genders, nope, I'm pretty solidly female. Gender expression, strongly feminine. I hopefully don't look very masculine. That's just me. No bias against the guys, sorry. Not much on the other. I've got my sex assigned at birth. Physically, I'm attracted to female persons. Not at all to men. I do have some attraction to other genders. There was this really cute genderqueer person I met a couple weeks ago, and they were, never mind. Emotionally, I am primarily attracted to women, not to men. I also have some attraction to other genders. What can I say? So, we can move on from that and discuss a little bit about some of the, oh. Am I pulling a fast one? It's true. I did check that I was strongly female in my identity, but I did. Yeah, you're right. I did check the male box there for sex assigned at birth. This is called disclosure, and I am disclosing to you that I had a different value given to me at birth than I currently identify as. This difference, this incongruity in gender information is, in this particular case, makes me a transgender person. Often people with this different assigned sex at birth than the gender they identify with will identify also as being a transgender person. Now, transgender is not a sexual orientation, unlike talking about gay, lesbian, bisexual, or queer persons. Transgender is how we got to where we are. It's a little different. For folks who did not have that variation between their assigned sex and their gender identity, we talk about them being cisgender. So cis and trans, they're two Latinate prefixes referring to something being flat and rotated. They're often used in chemistry of all things. And when the term transgender was developed to indicate persons who had this difference in gender identity, the term cis also came into use to refer to persons who did not have this variation. So you'll hear us talk about cis women versus trans women. A cis woman, it's a woman, born woman, assigned sex woman, identifies as a woman. A trans woman, assigned sex, not a woman, but identifies as a woman. So, with that little bit of information, what makes a person transgender? Let's talk about when we start off being transgender. So, when did I turn transgender? Well, it's hard to say because people don't really become transgender. They simply are of another gender than the one they were assigned at birth. So I guess I became trans when I was assigned the wrong gender at birth, but I don't remember. I was a baby. Thank you, Sophie LaBelle, for that great illustration. So there may be some point in time we can point to that where we can say we realized that transgender is the word that describes our sense of gender. But that's simply recognizing our nature, not becoming transgender. So what actually makes us transgender then? It's that difference in identity. And where does that come from? Well, some research has been done on this. A Dutch anatomist actually collected the brains of a variety of people, homosexual males, heterosexual women, and transgender people, and did a very detailed dissection of these. In 1995, they published a paper with some images of this, and they had found some very interesting variations. Down low in the brain, around an area where the hypothalamus lives, this is part of our endocrine system and our control system for our body, there's a region called the stria terminalis. Nervous impulses flow through here, and it fans out instructions into the body to control our muscles. There's one particular little area in this called the bed nucleus. And the anatomist examined that. In cisgender men, this was a very dense, heavily populated area, both in gay and straight men. In cisgender women, the region is very lightly populated, relatively low density. In transgender women, although they were assigned male at birth, again, the region has a very low density, low cellular population. So, this region in my brain happens to look like that. And that was recently verified with a functional MRI examination. There's been additional work done on this. This was verified independently in the year 2000 by another research team. Additional results showed a sexually dimorphic nucleus in the preoptic area of the brain, the preoptic cortex. Sexually dimorphic means it's different in men than in women. Also showed this kind of behavior where in transgender women, the region looks similar to that in cisgender women. So there are these structural differences in the brain. It appears that something can happen in the fetal development process before birth. Our genitalia are laid down in the first few weeks of development. The structure for those is largely set in motion, how those will grow. It isn't really until the second half of fetal development, those last 4.5 months or so, that brain development gets rolling in detail. So between the early stages and the later stages of a pregnancy, environmental factors, stresses on the mother or child, side effects of certain pharmaceuticals can all actually alter the activity of cells as though they were growing in an environment that was supposed to be a different gender. And that can produce some very profound effects. It actually produces these mismatches in the brain, between the brain and our genitals. Gender dysphoria is a diagnostic term that's used these days. It describes the discomfort that many people with this gender incongruity, this difference between what's going on up here and what's going on down there, what that difference has. It turns out this gender dysphoria, this discomfort, is not a purely psychological thing. Those structural changes happen to be in regions that are sensitive to our body's chemistry, including our hormones. So it turns out many of us, many transgender persons, can get some relief from gender dysphoria by having our hormone mix adjusted. It's kind of an interesting thing that there's this biological component to all this. Now, having this dysphoria makes you uncomfortable. It doesn't make you unable to function. A person with gender dysphoria can still have a long and productive life. It is not, therefore, a disease or a medical disorder. It is not a mental illness. It's simply a condition. It's not too dissimilar in that regard from other conditions that have been misinterpreted in the past, such as being left-handed. A person can be left-handed, but not require treatment for that. Trying to correct it can be very bad. Similarly, a person with a difference between their gender identity and their assigned gender at birth, well, trying to treat that by convincing the person to change their identity can have very bad side effects. Yet, that is what living in a binary culture like ours, that expresses a lot of pressure on transgender people to remain at their birth gender, can do. Folks who are transgender experience anxiety over being discovered, anxiety over slipping in their movements, because they're not going to move and behave exactly like a cisgender person with that same birth sex. Again, these variations are at work. There's a fear of anxiety, a fear of discovery. There's a fear of social rejection. So this anxiety is persistent. That fear of social rejection can be very depressing. It becomes chronic depression from an external source, society. Since it's outside of us, that means that the usual drugs used to treat anxiety and depression don't work all that well. It's not a chemistry problem in the brain. It's a social problem. Treatment for that involves accepting oneself, just saying, well, this is what I actually am, and coming out. That coming out process is when I first started looking the way I look. Even after we've come out, recovery is still difficult because there's ongoing discrimination. The obvious big kinds, people following me into a restroom and screaming at me. Happened up at Sun Valley Mall. It's not that far away from us. Being accosted on the street and threatened, which happened to me about a month ago. So this is not that uncommon right here in Walnut Creek. Yeah, oh, absolutely. There are people out there who just cannot accept that we are what we are. Some people will deliberately misgender us, use the wrong pronouns. Some people will accidentally misgender us, accidentally use the wrong pronouns. And that hurts too. In fact, there's a little statement, intent versus impact. The intent of doing something like that and the impact of it, well, they're kind of not the same thing. You can hurt somebody even without intending to. So those pronouns actually matter. Here, you'll see some people running around our church with these badges. On the badges, we have pronoun stickers. So for folks that would like to identify their gender identity on their membership badge, we can provide you with a sticker to add to your badge. A little plug here. Now, this is actually more important than you'd think. This is not just important for transgender people to do. This is actually important for everyone. We would like to send the message that this is an accepting congregation, that it's okay to let us know what your pronouns are, and we'll try to use them. We accept that. It's okay for you to do it. It's a safe place for you to do that. See, we're all identifying ourselves too. So we'd like you all to join in us. So if you see someone around with one of these badges, stop us and ask for a little sticker to add to your name tag. Okay, that's the end of my promo. Now, the big points to remember in all this is that a person's gender might not be the same as the sex assigned at birth. Gender has many parts to it. The big three are gender identity, who we are, our gender expression, how we present our identity to the world, and our gender orientation, who we're attracted to. And unlike the lesbian, the gay, the bisexuals, and the LGBT, the transgender is actually not a sexual orientation, but an indicator of gender incongruity. A trans person could also be straight, gay, lesbian, genderqueer. So I'm going to wrap things up here, and then we're going to get into some questions and answers. Just to let you know, if you need to find more information on this, at UUA.org, the Unitarian Universalist Association Online, the LGBTQ section has an enormous amount of information on this topic and others related to it. That's where the basic definitions, the first 2 pages of your handout, came from. That is also where you'll find Transgender 101, which is a great whole other presentation, much more detail and information than what I've given you today. Another great thing to take a look at is a book, The Gender Knot, Unraveling Our Patriarchal Legacy by Alan Johnson. This is a really good book. It's been used as the basis for at least one UUA course. The book describes where our patriarchal society comes from and the impact it's had on us in a lot of different ways. A couple of good references for you. So now let's move on into some questions. Question and answer time.
We're going to get a mic.
Oh, very good.
So stand by.
All right. That's easier. I would repeat the questions otherwise, just to make sure that we get it on the record. But with a microphone, excellent. All right. Daniel.
I'm Daniel, and I have kind of a two-parter. One is, what country is the most advanced in acknowledging this? Second, in the medical community, is it being taught in medical schools looking for gender orientation identity? I'm not too sure how to phrase that question, but I think you see what I mean.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting question. As far as areas of the world where being a trans person is most accepted, there are biases in much of the world. It turns out some parts of Southeast Asia, some parts of Thailand, it's very accepted and treated openly, although even there you will find biases with some groups. Western European culture has been exported to a number of places through our colonial process and through missionaries. So it's kind of gotten in everywhere. But there are many cultures like that where it's quite accepted. Thailand, some Native American groups are quite accepting and open. Those would probably be the biggest ones I can think of off the top of my head. And yes, gender information is now being taught in medical school. That's a fairly recent change. It's not being taught terribly intensively. It can wind up being just an hour's worth within one larger unit, but it is at least being presented to the doctors so they're aware of it. There are additional projects going on being sponsored by various groups. Rainbow Community Center, for example, is working on a project to help out with the John Muir healthcare system. Several of my friends are on a panel with the Kaiser system to help them learn how things work. And we're trying to educate doctors out there too as well. Most doctors are better than they used to be. Elsie.
First of all, excuse me. I want to thank you for trusting us here at the congregation and being open and honest. It makes me feel like I'm in the right religion at the right church, and I'm trying to learn new language, so thank you very much. My question, and then a second thing, is to thank all of you, because Michelle and a handful of comrades aren't enough to make this change in our congregation or our community. So all of you, if you could all help us be more respectful to people who are transgendered and learn. My question would be, can you give me a couple examples, maybe even within this church, Michelle, that people may have, for whatever reason, I don't need to know the reason that they misgendered you. What may be, can you give an example in which someone may have misgendered you?
Oh, that happens occasionally in conversations. It's kind of interesting. I'll be conversing with a couple of other people. They might turn to each other and say, well, did you hear what he just said? He was talking about he who? Who he? What? It slips out accidentally. Generally, folks here, there doesn't seem to be an intent to harm, which is good. But it does happen, and it does hurt. It's just a conversational sort of thing. I often slip into a mode in speaking that sounds kind of male, like what's called male didactic mode. I'm up here lecturing away. And sometimes when I do that, people will try and read my voice as being male. Yes, Ryan?
So I found that usually when people misgender...
And hold the mic close. Because
Okay.
Yes.
I've found that when people generally misgender both anyone I know who's transgender, it's generally because they know they're transgender. Mm-hmm. Like the moment that information happens, misgendering happens.
Yes.
Even if they were being gendered correctly before.
Thank you, Ryan. And you're absolutely right on that. That's the cultural part of this. Our culture is a little bit poisonous that way. Once we decide that, oh, a person was born with a certain bit of sexual hardware, that's it. Show's over. You're that gender forever and ever, and everything else about you is weird. It's just the way our culture happens to be. We need to change that, by the way, and somehow or other, I hope to do some of that. Yes,
So,
Elizabeth.
I get misgendered all the time. I am not transgender, but I wear clothing that doesn't identify with my female gender. Like today, I'm wearing a pair of jeans. And I know those of you who know me know I'm female, but I will tell you that I have almost on a monthly basis get called sir. It happens when I get on an airplane and someone is taking boarding passes. The man in front of me says, "Thank you, sir, for flying with Southwest." "Thank you, sir." "Thank you, ma'am." "Thank you, sir." It gets to me, and they say, "Thank you, sir." When I'm in a restaurant, I'm sitting with my wife, who looks fabulously female, wears earrings and jewelry, and has longer hair, and I can understand that if I'm at a table with her, they see a couple, so if they can see clearly that she's female, and then they're coming from behind, I've got the shorter hair on the back of the neck, and I'm not wearing earrings, I get called sir. So I think there's so many things that we do in our society, and wearing jewelry is one of those. Because I do not wear jewelry, because I do not wear makeup, I don't have lipstick on my lips, I don't have anything dangling from my ears, I am called sir many, many, many times. I don't take offense to it, but I can understand that if I was actually trying to transition to a different gender and trying to identify, it would be incredibly offensive. So I know that I'm incredibly sensitive to it, and I want to say how much I appreciate the pin that you sometimes wear that says she, her,
Yes.
because that helps the brain with the transition. And I know that I have a friend who has transitioned, and this friend has transitioned for many years. In my mind, I still have memories of when I did things with her. And when I have a visual of playing Frisbee with her, when I went camping with her, I want to talk about my friend and my memories override. I know that he now has a male name, and I have no problem saying his name. I'm good with the name. I can say Trevor. I don't have any problem remembering that. But when I use pronouns, the pronouns revert back to the female pronoun. It is a really strange trick in the mind. So I don't know that anyone is doing it intentionally.
No.
I think it is a slip, and it's something that you have to be incredibly intentional about.
Yeah, it does take a bit of concentration to get it right, I'm afraid.
Hi, to your point, in full disclosure, I had a really hard time with Mr. Barb and pronouns. And never once did I think Mr. Barb was a woman. It never entered my mind, but there was such a deep ingrained thing in my head because of the name Barb.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to work at that so hard. It would just, I started thinking this is like people I know who are Spanish speakers or German, and they always call a dog a he, even if they know it's a girl dog.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, a lot of times it's like the reptile brain. This is so embedded in people, so it's not at all, at least from my anecdotal experience, it was totally unintentional. And what Elizabeth was saying has been happening to my daughter at school, where she wasn't allowed to use the girls' bathroom. And she was born a girl. She identifies as a girl, and I'm still fighting it with. And they have very specific policies against this at their school. But the vice principal, when she reported this, said, "Well, you understand why that happened, because you have short hair."
Oh.
That was his response. So it's still going on. But to me, one of the, this is so helpful having all this, but to me, it's still ultimately, when you say people who identify as masculine or feminine, I'm like, well, what does that mean anymore? To me, I think, is it stereotypes? I don't know what that means anymore.
To some extent, yes, those are actually stereotypes. That's why, as part of these axes that we show, for instance, in the gender unicorn, there is that other axis that shows how far off of that male-female stereotypical range a person is. The identity is really what sets all this. Our gender identity, which is living up here. The basis for our identity comes out of the brain in this structure. We then build our gender roles on top of that identity. I try very hard to get my presentation right, because if I get too casual about it, I get misgendered. If I slip on my voice, I'm misgendered. And sadly, I've been guilty of this too. I have misgendered other people. It just sometimes just slips out. Now, the thing about that is, if we do slip, just say, oh, sorry, move on, just correct yourself and keep going. Don't dwell on it with the other person. That just hurts. And for goodness sakes, don't try to justify using the wrong gender on a person. Please don't do that. Yes, that happens. A person doing that is basically arguing with me about my own identity. And it's like, hey, I live in this thing. I have an advantage over you. I'm pretty sure about this. Yes?
So I am a trans man. I'm sorry. Hi.
There you go.
I'm Jesse. I'm a trans man. I am kind of still early in transitioning and working on presentation. And so I frequently will tell people, please call me with he, him pronouns when they're consistently misgendering me. And they just look at me like I grew another head. And I'm just like, okay, so I'm transgender. And they immediately think that I'm a trans woman.
Uh-huh.
And
That's
I've
how
had it
people notice.
explained to me that this is because all of the media on transgender people and people who've never met a trans person before, and these are people who haven't met a trans person before, like the only people that they've seen in the media are trans women. And so they see a trans person and they assume that I must be a trans woman because that's the only trans people that exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my question to you is, why is that? Do you know historically, like, why is that?
Yeah, Ryan.
So, in my opinion, the reason is pretty simple. Due to the way that the gender binary is expressed in the US, it's okay for a woman to wear pants. On the other hand, it is not acceptable for a man to wear a skirt. So therefore, you can have a more masculine gender expression as a trans man, but having a more feminine gender expression as a trans woman stands out. So a lot of trans men were basically going under the radar, not telling people, just trying their best to be comfortable in their own skin and still not hitting the radar.
That's absolutely correct. We have tomboys, no big deal. Tom girls, not so much. There's actually, it turns out that ratio-wise, it's roughly 50-50, trans men to trans women. It's very interesting. I've also found that trans men pass as men more readily than trans women can pass as women. It's another one of these cultural biases that's built in, and it's also a testament to the very powerful effect that hormonal changes can have on the body. So, oh yes, please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie. Oh, hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie. I am a trans woman, and the reason I'm standing up is because my physicality isn't a female norm. I'm 6'2", weigh over 200 pounds, and I'm not a demure, petite girl, but I am a big girl. And first of all, I want to thank you for this excellent presentation. I think it's very enlightening, very enlightening. Second, I'm so sorry that that happened to you in the restroom, that incident. A similar thing happened to me in San Francisco, where I was forcibly ejected from a restroom in a major hotel, which is against the law. we transgender people have the right to use the restroom of our gender identity. I took that case to the Human Rights Commission in San Francisco, and we did win a case against this hotel.
Oh, very good.
Thank you. They had to initiate a training program for their staff, which was their security people and some of the other cleaning staff that were involved in kicking me out. So it was traumatic, but it was important for me to stand up for the law, which is not only a city ordinance, but a state. So if that ever happens to you, you are standing on solid legal grounds. If somebody harasses you or whatever happens, or did you? Sorry, I can't tell you which one it is. That was the terms of the settlement. But yeah, there was a settlement, but it ended up on their part that they had to do a major training program and some other things. So, because it could have been big publicity and so forth. But let's just say it was a big, major San Francisco hotel near Market.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, and also I also had several weeks ago was physically threatened on Muni in San Francisco. Turned out okay, I was not injured, but this kind of thing can happen to us, and you have to be careful. Whether it's a trans man or trans woman, it doesn't matter. You can still be subject to a lot of violence. My question is, got a long way coming around to the question. In your presentation, which was medical intervention that can take place for people with gender dysphoria that may choose to do as part of their dealing with this condition to actually have what they call gender reassignment surgery.
Correct.
Hormones and so forth, which in my case, I did because it was very important for me to have a body that matched who I felt I was. But I don't know if there was a question in this or not, but that issue of transsexuality.
Yeah, the word transgender has a little history behind it. It currently is a big umbrella embracing all sorts of variations on gender identity versus assigned sex. Originally, it was developed by, it was applied by a doctor, Dr. Harry Benjamin, to identify people who had these gender issues but were not seeking medical intervention. Now it's an umbrella covering everything. The word transsexual, it's still acceptable in most communities. There are a few that people get offended about it, just to warn you. But that term refers to people getting medical intervention. It's a medical term, and in the medical sense, it refers to a person who is seeking or currently receiving any one of a variety of medical treatments toward resolving gender and sexual issues. So, got a little bit more here.
I'm Leslie. My pronouns are she and her.
Thank you.
Just so you all know, we had the board retreat yesterday, and we used pronouns, and I'm practicing getting used to that. It's new, so pronouns are important, and the board recognizes that, and we're working on that ourselves. When I had my first child, we got advance notice of what their chromosomal makeup, their karyotype was.
Okay.
And that was interesting, and we knew to get pink clothing, right?
Okay.
Because we weren't enlightened. And by the time we had our second kid, we didn't care. And we didn't get the advance test to show what kind of chromosomes our kid had. But my question, I thought it was fascinating to hear about the brain structure, and I'm wondering if chromosomal karyotypes match up with that brain structure.
No, they
or if
don't.
it has no, no bearing on whether the